Welcome everyone to another episode of Archetype Review. This time around we are going to be diving right into the Gravekeeper'S Archetype. So the Gravekeeper'S Archetype is definitely a very unusual one, and I say unusual because it's really had a very dynamic history in regard to being relevant or not. For one, Gravekeepers are one of the first, if not the first archetype to ever be created for the TCG, because they were initially released on July 18, 2003 in the set known as Pharaonic Guardian. Their latest support has come as late as 2018, which means that in approximately 15 years, they've still had support. The biggest reason why Gravekeepers are very dynamic and have had a lot of different things here and there throughout the history is because of the way that they work. Overall, Gravekeepers utilize the graveyard, but not exactly in the same utilization that you would think that many other archetypes use it in. Instead, their goal is to use lockdown effects through the graveyard. The main card in their deck is known as NECROVALLEY. It's a very powerful card that really limits and prohibits things from going off in the graveyard. Because the majority of decks utilize the graveyard to its fullest potential by basically using the graveyard as a second hand, the fact that Gravekeepers can lock down the graveyard means that they're actually very anti-meta decks. Despite this though, there's only a handful of Gravekeepers cards that are actually worth considering in a very formidable deck, and for these reasons, that's why it's kind of gone here and there when it comes to actually being a very effective deck. Okay, so let's go ahead and explore this archetype. So we are going to start with Spell Ruler, which came out in September 16, 2002. Now I know I said the archetype initially came out in 2003 with Pharaonic Guardian, but there was actually one card that came out before that, and the card is Gravekeeper's Servant. Gravekeeper's Servant is a continuous spell card that says, unless your opponent sends one card from the top of his or her deck to the graveyard, he or she cannot declare an attack. So this card is actually a very good example of a card that is not actually all really in the theme of the archetype. Overall, it came out before the actual thing became an archetype, so that's probably why. The actual first set to introduce the Gravekeeper's archetype was Pharaonic Guardian, which came out in July 18th, 2003. The first card in the set is Gravekeeper'S Assailant. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster monster with 1500 attack and defense. Its effect says, when this card declares an attack while NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls. Change that target's battle position. Overall, it wasn't even a good card back then when it first came out, and the biggest reason why it's really shit right now is the fact that it basically relies on changing battle positions, a mechanic that has not been relevant since I don't even know when, a long time ago. Yeah, don't bother with this one. The next one is Gravekeeper's Cannon Holder. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1400 attack and 1200 defense, and its effect reads, you contribute one Gravekeeper's monster except Gravekeeper's Cannon Holder, inflict 700 damage to your opponent. So as you can see, the effect is very similar to Cannon Soldier, a card that is very notorious for creating a lot of OTKs. Despite actually inflicting more burn damage per tribute than Cannon Soldier, overall it's a bigger limited card. The reason why is because it focuses specifically on tributing Gravekeeper's monsters. The overall theme of Gravekeepers is not to tribute themselves, thus it's actually fairly difficult to get them on the field to swarm, so this card, while it has a pretty good effect, really has no utilization within the archetype itself. The next card on the list is Gravekeeper's Chief. It's a dark level 5 spellcaster with 1900 attack and 1200 defense, and its effect reads, you can only control one face-up Gravekeeper's Chief. Your graveyard is unaffected by NECROVALLEY. When this card is tribute summoned, you can target one Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. Despite the very lackluster stats for level 5, it was actually a decent card back when it came out in 2003. The fact that upon a tribute summon it would special summon another Gravekeeper's monster was actually a big benefit. In addition, it prevented from your graveyard being affected by NECROVALLEY. Nowadays the card is incredibly irrelevant. The main reason why is because nobody tribute summons anymore, since you cannot even utilize its second effect that much. Next card on the list is Gravekeeper's Curse. It's a dark level 3 spellcaster with 800 attack and defense, and its effect reads, if this card is summoned, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. As you can see, the effect is incredibly underwhelming even for 2003 standards. This is a card that was never really utilized, and it's never going to be utilized, so moving on. Gravekeeper's Guard is another dark level 4 spellcaster with 1000 attack and 1900 defense, and its effect says, flip, target one monster your opponent controls, return that target to the hand. Well, it was pretty solid back when it came out. Nowadays it's been power crept like hell, and well, it's not really relevant because of the fact that it's a flip effect monster and nobody in their right mind uses flip effect monsters anymore. But yeah, It was pretty solid, one of the better Gravekeepers back in 2003, but it slowly diminished in use. Next one on the list is Gravekeeper's Spear Soldier. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1500 attack and 1000 defense, and it says, if this card attacks the defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. Well, one of the things that you've kind of already seen that's been a little trendy is the fact that Gravekeepers have pretty shit stats. This card, although yeah, the stats are pretty underwhelming, they were, I guess, okay back in 2003 standards, and it had piercing damage, making it not horrible, but even then, it was still mediocre. Basically, it was a small upgrade over Mad Sword Beast, but even then, I mean, can you really brag about this card? No. It really diminished very fast. The next card on the list is Gravekeeper's Spy. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1200 attack and 2000 defense, and its effect says, flip, special summon one Gravekeeper's monster with 1500 attack or less attack from your deck. Well, as you can see, this is actually one of the better cards, at least back in the day. Nowadays, once again, being a flip effect monster, not really utilized all that much because it's incredibly slow. However, back then, oh boy was it useful. Aside from having really good stats for level 4, meaning 2000 defense and not a horrible attack stat, it actually basically let you special summon any one Gravekeeper's monster with 1500 attack or less, meaning it could also special summon level 5 or higher monsters if they at least had 1500 attack or less, which eventually there were some Gravekeepers like that. This was definitely a 3 of back in the day. Nowadays, it's not the best idea, but there's other monsters that are overall better than this one. Next one on the list is Gravekeeper's Vassal. It's a dark level 3 spellcaster with 700 attack and 500 defense, and its effect says, any battle damage this card inflicts to your opponent is treated as effect damage instead. This is definitely a very odd one. It has absolutely no synergy with the rest of the archetype. Horrible stats, horrible effect. Yeah, I really don't know what to say about this one, aside from the fact that it's actually a little popular in Duel Links because of bonuses, because its effect treats it as effect damage when you get the effect damage bonus, but I'm not talking about Duel Links right now, I'm talking about the actual TCG, so yeah, ignore this one please. The next one is Gravekeeper's Watcher. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1000 attack and defense, and its effect says, during either player's turn when your opponent activates a spell or trap card or monster effect that can make them discard when it resolves, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. So this was one of the game's first hand traps, believe it or not. There were a few before that, but I mean, overall, despite it being a hand trap, it's not like it was ever amazing, because it's not. It's very specific in what it can actually counter, and that's the overall issue with the card, but every now and then you would find decks that would run maybe one copy of this, but despite that, it's okay. Next card on the list is Charm of SHABTI. It's an Earth level 1 rock monster with 100 attack and defense, and its effect says, during either player's turn you can discard this card. Until the end phase, Gravekeeper's monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle. So this is actually another hand trap essentially, because well, you can discard it during either player's turn. This effect is also a little mediocre, similar to Gravekeeper's Watcher. It's a little less niche and specific, but overall it protects Gravekeeper's monsters from, well, one type of destruction, battle. It's decent back in 2003, nowadays it's horrible and never ran, so there is that, but yeah, ignore it. The next card is easily the most iconic card from the Gravekeeper's archetype, NECROVALLEY. It's a field spell that says, all Gravekeeper's monsters gain 500 attack and defense. Cards in the graveyard cannot be banished. Negate any card effect that would move a card in the graveyard to a different place. Negate any card effect that changes types or attributes in the graveyard. Now the first thing I will say is that this effect was actually not the original effect of NECROVALLEY back in 2003. Over the past few years, NECROVALLEY slowly received an errata that indirectly buffed it because it was able to maintain even more graveyard lockdown effects. Because this card is easily the most iconic and one of the most important, if not the most important card in a Gravekeeper's deck, well, it's very apparent that you must run 3 of these at all times. The 500 attack buff in both attack and defense is actually very significant, especially back in 2003 standards, where 500 was actually a very sizable buff. On top of that, it can easily lock down many decks that easily utilize the graveyard, such as special summoning from the graveyard, or banishing and so on and so forth, so there's that. On top of that, it also negates anything that can change type or attribute in the graveyard, which can also lock down a few other decks. Overall, this is the biggest reason why this deck is a very good definition of anti-meta decks. The next card is Rite of Spirit. It's a normal trap card that says target one Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. This card's activation and effect are unaffected by NECROVALLEY. So this was actually a really good card back in the day. Nowadays you might want to run one copy of it, but even then it's a little debatable. Now at first glance you might be thinking, well, why don't you just run like Call the Haunted? It's very similar but technically better because it's more universal. Well, there's one specific issue with cards like Call the Haunted going into a Gravekeeper's deck. If you look at the last sentence of this effect, it says it's unaffected by NECROVALLEY. That's the biggest reason what makes this card a little more unique, that unless you have a Gravekeeper's monster or something on your side of the field that's making you immune to NECROVALLEY, you cannot utilize cards like Monster Reborn or Call the Haunted or Premature Burial and stuff like that, because you're locking yourself out too. But if you use specific archetype cards like this card, well, you have that benefit that it actually negates the NECROVALLEY's blocking effect. That's the overall reason why this card still has some specific use. Not amazing anymore, the biggest reason it's a trap card, but at least it can special summon any one Gravekeeper's monster and it blocks NECROVALLEY, so yeah, pretty good card even today. The next card is an Owl of Luck. It's a wind level 2 winged beast monster with 300 attack and 500 defense. Its effect says, flip, select one field spell card from your deck and place it on top of your deck. If NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can add the selected field spell card to your hand instead. There is absolutely no reason why you would ever want to run this card, especially nowadays where there are much better ways to get your NECROVALLEY into your hand, such as wink wink terraforming. That's only one example, but there's actually plenty more. Yeah, don't run this. The next card on the list is a Cat of Ill Omen. It's a dark level 2 beast flip effect monster with 500 attack and 300 defense. Its effect says, flip, choose one trap from your deck and place it on top of your deck, or if NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can add that trap to your hand instead. Similar to an Owl of Luck, there's really no reason why you would want to run this specifically in a NECROVALLEY deck, so yeah, but it's worth mentioning because, well, the card NECROVALLEY is on the card tag, so it's technically a related card to the Gravekeeper's Archetype. And the last card for this set is Royal Tribute. It's a normal spell that says, if you control NECROVALLEY, both players discard any monsters in their hands. Royal Tribute was one of those cards known as a, quote, cheap card, simply because if you started with this card alongside NECROVALLEY in your opening hand and you went first, you could simply activate NECROVALLEY, then follow that by activating Royal Tribute before your opponent even gets a turn, and they would already be out of like 3 or 4 cards from their hand. Thus basically you having hand advantage already and basically giving you the win by that point. Yeah, it was definitely very cheap, and that's why it easily found its way into the ban list, and it was limited for the longest time, up until very recently where it's no longer on the ban list, so people can actually start to try to abuse this card once again. Overall, it's a really good card, but I would not recommend putting 3 copies of it, especially because of the state that the game is now, where it could get really cloggy in your hand if you really screw this up, so be careful, but overall it's still a really fantastic card. The next set introduced one additional Gravekeeper's monster, and it's known as Force of the Breaker, which came out on May 16, 2007. The one and only card for this set is Gravekeeper's Commandant. It's an Earth level 4 spellcaster with 1600 attack and 1500 defense. It says, you can discard this card to the graveyard, add one NECROVALLEY from your deck to your hand. Well, very simple but very effective. Because of the fact that NECROVALLEY is easily your most important card to have at all times, using a couple copies of Gravekeeper's Commandment in addition to terraforming or possibly Metaverse, that's the way to go about it. No complaints here, but it's a little debatable if you should run 2 or 3 because you want to mix it in well with terraforming, so it's really up to you, but you for sure want to run a couple copies of this. The next set is Absolute Power Force, which came out in February 16, 2010 and introduced 4 new additions to the archetype. The first one is Gravekeeper's Descendant. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1500 attack and 1200 defense. Its effect says, you can tribute one other face-up Gravekeeper's monster to target one card your opponent controls. Destroy that target. To be honest, it's a fairly solid card even nowadays. Many Gravekeeper's deck nowadays will run maybe 1 copy of this, but any more than this it gets a little too specific and cloggy, so you want to be very careful about it. But yeah, just tribute any one other Gravekeeper's monster, pop 1 card, that simple. The next card is Gravekeeper's Priestess. It's a dark level 3 spellcaster with 1000 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect says, while there is no face-up field spell, the field is treated as NECROVALLEY. All Gravekeeper's monsters on the field gain 200 attack and defense. For a while, people debated if you should actually include a copy of this, but overall the conclusion came to, no, don't do it. The simple reason why is because there cannot be any field spell on the field, meaning also on your opponent's side of the field. So if your opponent has a field spell card, the field is not going to be treated as NECROVALLEY. That's a little unfortunate. The attack boost for Gravekeepers is nice, but it's a little too minimal to be any of the significant factors, so there is that issue. So overall, not very good. The next one is Gravekeeper's Visionary. It's a dark level 8 spellcaster with 2000 attack and 1800 defense. Its effect says, you can tribute summon this card by tributing one Gravekeeper's monster. This card gains 200 attack for each Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard. If this face-up card would be destroyed, you can discard one Gravekeeper's monster instead. So I do appreciate the protection, but aside from that, that's kind of where the good things end. Overall, it's an okay card, not horrible, but it could have definitely been a lot better, especially by 2010 standards. So yeah, overall, avoid it. And the last card is Gravekeeper's STELE. It's a normal spell card that says target 2 Gravekeeper's monsters in your graveyard, add those targets to your hand. This effect cannot be negated by the effect of NECROVALLEY. Yeah, this is pretty good. As you can see, you're basically recycling your Gravekeeper's monsters similar to what Salvage does for the water attributes, so it's a pretty good card, and as you can see, it negates the effect of NECROVALLEY, so it doesn't matter if the card is on the field. You definitely want to run a few copies of this, but not that many, maybe 1 or 2 at the tops. Next set is Starstrike Blast, which introduced only 1 additional card, and it came out on November 16th, 2010. The one and only card is Gravekeeper's Recruiter. It's a dark level 3 spellcaster with 1200 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect says, if this card you control is sent to your graveyard, add 1 Gravekeeper's monster with 1500 or less defense from your deck to your hand. This is definitely a staple 3 of. It essentially serves as a Witch of the Black Forest, but specifically for Gravekeeper's monsters, and as you already know, Witch of the Black Forest is currently a banned card because it's that good. The fact that that's banned, and this is an identical effect except specifically for Gravekeepers, means that it must be good. Yeah, run 3 and never any less, please. The next set is Legacy of the Valiant, which came out on January 24th, 2014, and introduced 7 new additions to the archetype. We'll start with Gravekeeper's Ambusher, which is a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1700 attack and 0 defense. Its effect says, when this card is flipped face up, you can target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard. Place that target on the bottom of their deck. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard after being flipped face up, you can target 1 NECROVALLEY card in your graveyard. Add that target to your hand. These effects are unaffected by NECROVALLEY. Well, it's a little too slow. You wanna know why? You basically have to put this card face down, and then it must be flipped face up to utilize any of its effects, whether it's the first one or the second one being sent to the graveyard. Yeah, much too slow, that's the issue. That's overall why Gravekeeper's Recruiter is much better, because it can basically search out cards without being face down first. The next card is Gravekeeper's Heretic. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1800 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect says, this card in the field is unaffected by all other card effects, as long as NECROVALLEY is also on the field. At first glance, it might not look so powerful. You're like, it's a generic pretty good stat monster, right, with some protection. Well, actually it's pretty damn good. Going back to what I was saying, the one thing that Gravekeepers suffer a lot of is the fact that they by themselves don't really have very good attack stats. Gravekeeper's Heretic is a notable exception. Just think about this. If NECROVALLEY is on the field, this means that Gravekeeper's Heretic will have 2300 attack and unaffected by all other card effects. This essentially means that the only way for your opponent to get rid of it, in most cases, would be to either tribute it or attack with the monster with 2400 attack or more. To be honest, neither is particularly easy to achieve, so it does actually put a little bit of strain on your opponent. It's an overall solid card, and it's advisable to run a few copies of this because it definitely will help your deck a lot. The next card is Gravekeeper's Nobleman. It's a dark level 3 spellcaster with 1000 attack and defense, and its effect says, when this card you control is destroyed by battle with an opponent's attacking monster and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon 1 Gravekeeper's monster from your deck in face down defense position except Gravekeeper's Nobleman. The card is very underpowered compared to Gravekeeper's Recruiter. Now yes, this one does special summon the Gravekeepers, which is a big plus compared to Recruiter, but overall the method of triggering the effect is a lot more specific, which is why Recruiter is a much better monster. It must be destroyed by battle, and you are basically forced to special summon the Gravekeeper in face down defense position, which is very, very problematic. Yeah, not very good, that's for sure. The next one is Gravekeeper's Oracle. It's a dark level 10 spellcaster with 2000 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect says, you can tribute 3 monsters or 1 Gravekeeper's monster to tribute summon but not set this card. When this card is tribute summoned, you can activate any of these effects and resolve in sequence up to the number of Gravekeeper's monsters tributed for its summon. 1. This card gains attack equal to the combined levels that all monsters tributed for its tribute summon have on the field, times 100. 2. Destroy all set monsters your opponent controls. 3. All monsters your opponent currently controls lose 2000 attack and defense. This is an example of a card that, yes, technically it is a boss monster of the archetype, but it's actually fairly underpowered for being a boss monster. Its first effect will occasionally make it a really good beat stick, but that's kind of where that ends. Why not just summon a blue eyes white dragon, you know? The second effect destroys specifically set monsters your opponent controls, which basically means it's useless because nobody does that nowadays. And the third effect, that one is actually good, but by that point you have to tribute 3 Gravekeeper's monsters to get that good effect. It's hardly worth it if you ask me. Yeah, it's a little disappointing that their boss monster was this, which it's not very good. The next one is Gravekeeper's Shaman. It's a dark level 6 spellcaster with 1500 attack and defense. Its effect says, gains 200 defense for each Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard. Negate all monster effects that activate in the graveyard except Gravekeeper's monsters. While NECROVALLEY is also on the field, your opponent cannot activate field spell cards. Also, field spell cards cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. It does offer some very useful protection scenarios here and there, but overall as a card, it's decent at best. It's a card that would have been a little better if it was just a level 4 monster, and I don't think it would have been broken by any means. The fact that it's a level 6 really hinders it a lot, so no. The next card is Hidden Temples of NECROVALLEY. It's a continuous spell card that says, activate only if both a Gravekeeper's monster and NECROVALLEY are on the field. Neither player can special summon monsters except Gravekeeper's monsters. If either a Gravekeeper's monster or NECROVALLEY is not in the field, destroy this card. So this is a prime example of why this deck is so anti-meta. Combine this card with NECROVALLEY and you essentially have a huge lockdown on your opponent. It becomes incredibly difficult for them to do anything. Now yes, the requirement for keeping this card on the field is actually a little bit difficult because you need both NECROVALLEY and at least one Gravekeeper's monster to stay on the field, but besides that, it's actually overall pretty good. It essentially locks down extra deck summoning, many other swarming capabilities, also utilizing the graveyard becomes locked because of the fact that NECROVALLEY is on the field. Yeah, this is a really good combination, so run a couple of these. The next one is Imperial Tombs of NECROVALLEY. It's a counter trap card that says when a spell card, trap card, or monster effect is activated while both a Gravekeeper's monster and NECROVALLEY are on the field, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. You can only activate one Imperial Tombs of NECROVALLEY per turn. Once again, really good card. The fact that its cost is almost non-existent, basically just having NECROVALLEY and a Gravekeeper's monster on the field to negate any spell, trap, or monster effect, hell yeah. Please run a few of these because this is overall a really good counter card, and it's actually a very good alternative, sometimes even better than some of the Solemn cards depending on how you use it. And the last set is Soul Fusion, which came out on October 19th, 2018. The first card in the set is Gravekeeper's Headman. It's a dark level 3 spellcaster with 500 attack and 1500 defense, and it says, if this card is summoned, you can target one level 4 Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard, special summon it in attack position or face and defense position. You can only use this effect of Gravekeeper's Headman once per turn. This effect is unaffected by NECROVALLEY. This is easily another 3-up. The fact that simply on any summon, you can special summon any other level 4 Gravekeeper's monster from your graveyard? Yeah. Good swarming, very good swarming potential, combines really well with a lot of other aspects of the purpose of the archetype. Yeah, please run 3 of these. The next one is Gravekeeper's Spiritualist. It's a dark level 4 spellcaster with 1500 attack and defense, and it says, during your main phase, if NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can fusion summon one spellcaster fusion monster from your extra deck, using this card you control and other monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. You can only use this effect of Gravekeeper's Spiritualist once per turn. This card is very essential if you are going to a fusion build of Gravekeepers. I know what you're asking, but there hasn't been any. Well, that's all gonna change. Gravekeeper's Supernaturalist is a dark level 7 spellcaster fusion monster with 2000 attack and defense. Its effect says it requires 2 Gravekeeper's monsters, and its actual effect says gains attack and defense equal to the combined original levels of the materials used for its fusion summon times 100. While NECROVALLEY is on the field, this card and any card in your field zone cannot be destroyed by card effects. During your main phase, you can activate this effect. During the end phase of this turn, add one Gravekeeper's monster or one NECROVALLEY card from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Gravekeeper's Supernaturalist once per turn. Yeah, this is a really fantastic build for the Gravekeeper's Archetype. It's overall not an amazing card, but it's overall a really great card for a lot of utilization. So yeah, if you're going for a fusion build, run this plus Spiritualist, but no polymerizations please, because you don't need that at all. The next card is NECROVALLEY Temple. It is a continuous trap card that says, while a Gravekeeper's monster and NECROVALLEY are both on the field, monsters your opponent controls lose 500 attack and defense. Once per turn, during the main phase, if you control no card in your field zone, you can activate one NECROVALLEY directly from your hand or graveyard. If this card in your possession is destroyed by an opponent's effect and sent to your graveyard, you can set one NECROVALLEY spell / trap directly from your deck except NECROVALLEY Temple. The support for NECROVALLEY here is actually honestly insane. It is so good in so many ways, but because of the fact that it's a trap card that works specifically for where you're kind of a little behind with your NECROVALLEY combos, means that you really shouldn't be running 3 of this copy. Maybe 1 card, 2 tops, but even then it's a little debatable, but at least 1 card is really not going to hinder your deck at all. Yeah, a lot of really good stuff here, and the fact that it also basically lowers your opponent's monsters by another 500 means that your monsters have a 1000 attack advantage. Really fantastic in so many ways. Yeah, run one of these. And the very last card is NECROVALLEY Throne. It's a normal spell card that says activate one of these effects. Add one Gravekeeper's monster from your deck to your hand, or immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon one Gravekeeper's monster. You can only activate one NECROVALLEY Throne per turn. Okay, so I was about to say the one thing that they're really missing, aside from Gravekeeper's Recruiter helping out a bit, is searching. But that's been solved. This is your searcher. It makes no sense to run any less than 3 copies of this card. The fact that it has this, alongside a bunch of other NECROVALLEY support and Gravekeeper swarming and protection and all this, overall makes it really good. Oh my gosh, yeah, please run 3 of these. So that's about it for the Gravekeeper / NECROVALLEY archetype. As you can see, the archetype is actually really solid. It is missing a few things here and there, but to be honest, there's not a whole lot of ways to fix the few minor issues that it does have. As far as additional support, there are a few things you can do, but I'm not going to get too specific because, well, it's kind of generic stuff. Pretty much anything that helps out spellcaster support or dark support is really good. As you can see, all Gravekeeper's monsters are spellcaster, and the majority of them, aside from commandment, are dark or attribute. So it helps to have cards like maybe Allure of Darkness, basically generic things that will help out dark or spellcasters, as you can see. But aside from that, there really isn't too much in terms of what specifically you can use, because the Gravekeeper's archetype honestly runs really well on its own with very few minor staples on the side. There really isn't that much to hate about it, but overall it's an archetype that received a significant amount of buffs throughout. Back in the beginning of 2003, there really were not that many great ways to utilize NECROVALLEY. NECROVALLEY itself was always good, but that's kind of where it ended because there wasn't that much support for it. Eventually, when other cards came out, such as searching field spells like Commanding, Terraforming, additional protection, additional NECROVALLEY support, and searching capabilities, that's when the whole archetype overall became a lot better. Yeah, overall that's about all I'm going to say for the archetype. It's a very good one, and if you ever want to have a little bit of fun, especially ruining your friends' meta decks, please run this deck. They're going to hate you for it because it can lock down from special summoning as well as graveyard utilization. So yeah, that's about it for this episode here. Hopefully you once again enjoyed another archetype review, and as always, please let me know in the comments what you think. Maybe you disagree with some elements here or there, maybe you want to add your input on this, and also as always, please overall rate and review my purpose of these archetype review videos because, well, I actually do want to see your genuine feedback. So that's going to be it for now. Hopefully you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye everyone. See you all later.